Bueller, Bueller, Bueller.
He's sick. My best friend's sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from this guy who knows this kid is going with the girl who saw Ferris pass out at 31 Flavors last night. I guess it's pretty serious.
Thank you, Simone.
No problem whatsoever.
When we think of school, we often see it through the filter of our childhood reflection, painting a picture of youthful wonder, wholesome learning, nostalgic memories, and innocent coming of age. Unfortunately, this is not the reality of what is happening in schools today. Today, we are being bombarded by images of the real state of education, and it's dividing our country and drawing nationwide attention and media coverage.
Why would they not want parents to see what teachers are teaching their kids?
The teacher was reading books on transgender identity in a kindergarten classroom.
A disturbing video showing a student pummeling a teacher.
I don't want my son seeing a police officer with a KKK hood on pointing a gun at a child's face.
Parents are fuming over a sex ed course.
Too graphic for young students.
The principal has been segregating students by race.
I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
The Justice Department continues to treat parents as domestic terrorists.
It was supposed to be back to the classroom today for thousands of Chicago public school teachers and staff, but some are saying no, and the Chicago Teachers Union says they shouldn't have to.
Let's deny this off-key band of people. Let them die.
Public education has gone off the rails.
In my opinion, the union has gone from caring about children to a very different agenda. Now it's about power and money and politics, and somehow the kids are getting lost in all of that.
Once you get into this idea that it's really the government's job to educate children, you end up in a very, very dangerous place, and I don't see anything good coming out of that.
Public education is the largest industry in America. It's where all the money is. It's why the union is there. It's why it's so corrupt.
When we look at this radical agenda, the way our children are being exploited and the way parents are getting shut out, it comes down to one fundamental question. Whose children are they?
Whose children are they?
Whose children are they?
Whose children are they?
¿De quién son esos niños? Whose children are they?
Whose children are they?
Whose children are they?
Whose children are they? Well, this is not a debatable point. This is a function of nature and natural law and the very basis for the American Republic, that it is the right and responsibility of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children.
Where did this idea come from that we're even asking whose children are they? How did this become a debate about who our kids belong to? Why are teachers and administrators and unions all of a sudden thinking that they own these kids and they know best how to bring them up?
The Western tradition, especially in America, parents are the real parents of children, of their children. They are the ones teach their children the value. But the school is taking over that role.
At the heart of it, what we're seeing is a clash of two worldviews. Cultural Marxism and the Western civilization view based on the Judeo-Christian values. And the biggest contrast we're seeing is how children are viewed. In countries like the Soviet Union and East Germany, where I visited, children are seen as belonging to the state. And it's the state's right to teach them about everything, not just reading and writing arithmetic, but ultimate values, ultimate allegiance, and belief systems. Karl Marx was very clear on his view of who children belong to when he said, "The education of all children, from the moment that they can get along without a mother's care, shall be in state institutions."
This is a struggle that's been going on for over a century. Whose children are they? Are they the responsibility of parents or the responsibility of the government? The nuclear family is a protective barrier over the minds of those children. And breaking down the nuclear family has been on the agenda literally since Karl Marx. And there's no better way to get access to the minds of children than through a so-called public school system.
In China, we always taught the children are the successor of the communism. Our real parents are the party and Mao. One of the songs I was taught and everyone sang is 爹亲娘亲不如毛主席亲. It's translated as Mao is our real parent.
I was born and raised in communist Cuba under Castro. They always tried to replace the parents in communist systems because one of their core tenets is that we need to be in charge of educating and preparing the younger generations. It's been 62 years and we're still fighting against it.
So I was born in Romania under the communist regime of Nicolae Ceausescu. Communists target children in schools because, number one, they are the future. Number two, they are an easy target.
John Dewey is the single most important character in the history of our modern educational system. There isn't even a close second. He believed so thoroughly in Marxism and communism that he went to the Soviet Union and wrote back these glowing reports that appeared in the New Republic about how wonderful the system was. He was especially fond of their school system, which he bragged was instilling a collectivistic mentality into the children. And that's what he wanted for America.
And his book, Democracy in Education, is a statement of utilizing education for a political purpose.
He worked on training teachers. He worked on training the future leaders of the school system. He also worked on creating the materials that would be used in public schools all across America. Now, obviously, the unions were a huge part of that, especially the NEA. He was made the honorary life president of the National Education Association for very obvious reasons. You know, it's really, in my opinion, incredible that he was able to get away with all of this.
It is devastating for the original concept of educating children broadly in all things for the purpose of knowledge and to maintain liberty. But Dewey wins the day, starting in about 1914.
I grew up in a communist community in New York. Both my parents were card-carrying communists. It was the beginning of the Cold War. There was, you know, the atomic bomb. Everybody was a little nervous. They were both high school teachers. I marched on my first political demonstration, which was a May Day demonstration, organized and controlled by the Communist Party. They had big banners that said Local 555 of the Teachers Union, which was controlled by the Communist Party. So the communists have been at it a long, long time.
Our American founders told us the only way to keep a free republic is with a well-educated and moral citizenry that can self-govern. So the communists, through Dewey and the teacher unions, intentionally undermined our educational system. Here are a few of the 45 communist goals that were actually read into our congressional record in 1963. Goal number 17, get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations. Put the party line in textbooks. Goal 32. Support any socialist movement to give centralized control over the culture, including education. Goal 41. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Goal 31. Belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history. Goal 30. Discredit the American founding fathers. Goal 25. Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books. Goal 28. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools. Obviously, they've been very successful.
Communists have been talking about having a U.S. Department of Education since at least the 1920s and 30s, and they wanted this Department of Education to de-Christianize, to make the schools less patriotic, and to teach communist propaganda. A real turning point in America's educational system came in 1965 when they passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act signed by Lyndon Johnson. This is when the federal funding started flowing into the school system, and it didn't take long for the federal control to follow right behind it. It was like the camel's nose under the tent, and it was less than a generation later that under the leadership of Jimmy Carter, thanks to promises he made to the union, the NEA, that they came up with the Federal Department of Education. This is really a new phenomenon in the American experience, the idea that we would even have a U.S. Department of Education, but it actually lines up perfectly with communist goals.
It's instructive to note that Ben Franklin, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, who had great commentary influence on education systems, the thought never occurred to any of them to empower the federal government to have any role at all in the education of Americans. The Constitution gives no authority to the U.S. government to meddle in the affairs of education. They have no power to do it from a constitutional standpoint.
What do I think about people who defend socialism saying that it hasn't been implemented correctly? Well, we have a saying for that in Cuba, and the rough translation is that it's very easy to swim when you are out of the water. So to those people that say that, I'm like, it's very easy to defend socialism when you have never had to suffer the consequences on your own back.
I just want to make this point. This is a very important point. I grew up in Mao's China. I spent my entire school years in Cultural Revolution. I know what communism is like. America, we won the Cold War, but America did not defeat communism.
If you want to understand the priorities of the union, follow the power and the money. Union leaders live a limousine lifestyle.
You can see that disparity, between the average classroom teacher and the person who supposedly is representing them at the top of the union pyramid in Washington or in a state capitol.
And of course, we never discuss the fact that the per student amount of tax dollars that are spent has skyrocketed.
Between 1992 and 2014, per pupil education expenditures actually jumped by 27% after adjusting for inflation nationwide. But over the same period, real teacher salaries, after adjusting for inflation, actually dropped by 2%. So we're throwing more and more money into the system, but it's not actually going to individual teachers in the classroom because of power dynamics and incentives on the part of the union bosses.
And we don't look at also the fact that the levels of administrators versus teachers has skyrocketed.
And if you look at more recent data between 2000 and 2017, Education Next has documented that nationwide, the number of students in the system increased by 7%, the number of teachers in the system increased by 8%, the number of principals and assistant principals increased by 33%, and finally, the number of administrators in the system increased by a whopping 75%. In what other industry do you lose 6% of your customer base and then you throw more and more people into the system? it doesn't make any sense until you start to think about the logic and incentives of the teachers union bosses like Randy Weingarten, who make over $560,000 per year according to the latest data. They want to put more and more people into the buildings because that means more dues paying members, more revenues for the union bosses, and then at the same time it means a larger voting bloc to push for their political nonsense into the classroom at the national level.
A real turning point for me was at a teacher union conference. One brave teacher stood up and asked a question. She asked the question all of us wanted to ask. Why are you spending our money on politics? We don't want our money spent on politics. We'd like to have a voice. They shut her down immediately. They harangued her, they silenced her, and while doing so, they silenced all of us.
And you see it in like teachers' meetings, for example. Can we keep politics out of this? And teachers would come back and say, well, we are a political body. You know, this group of teachers is a political body. No, we're not.
The teachers union has basically been a monolithic organization when it comes to pushing a certain very liberal viewpoint.
94% of the teachers union's political spending goes to Democrats. So if you don't think that what your children are going through is political, you're wrong, and I refuse to be part of that.
For example, look at Randy Weingarten, who's the president of the American Federation of Teachers, one of the two main major teachers unions in the country, and you look at her recent speech that she gave to the AFT. She basically lays out a political agenda, a very liberal social justice agenda. The clearest statement of the reason why teachers union exists, it comes from Albert Shanker, the then president of the American Federation of Teachers, who said, well, when children pay union dues, I'll represent children.
There's so much damage done by the lockdown on the students.
Keeping kids out of school has definitely been a detriment.
It was a horrible policy.
It has been absolutely heart-wrenching watching what the kids have gone through and their emotional roller coaster.
Days turned into weeks and then months.
I can't imagine that we would no longer have a band program because we're blowing air into the classroom. I can't imagine having to be masked and told we're not allowed to sing. They're not allowed to express joy or beauty. I can't do that.
It's gotten so absurd. There are viral images of band students trapped in little individual tents trying to play their big instruments. It's ridiculous.
Also during the shutdown, many educational experts said that children have lost over a year's worth of learning. We have no idea what has happened to this generation, and we may not know for years. For young children, you can picture them sitting there 4, 5, 6, 7 years old in front of a screen for hours at a time.
I've never seen such absenteeism. And even when we were saying that they were here, many of my kids would be in bed. Some of them would be sleeping. Some of them would be watching YouTube while they were in class, other cartoons.
This has created what many child development experts have called the invisible child syndrome. They're not seen, and they feel completely disconnected from any other human being. I heard from a kindergarten teacher recently that when the children finally came back, her heart was broken because they didn't even look at each other. They didn't speak. They did not act like normal children act.
Right now, there's 1 in 5 children that have neurological issues in school. No one questions why there's an epidemic of children who cannot focus, who cannot think, who cannot memorize. That is what we need to be focused on.
Early education is really about socialization, and these children had exactly the opposite.
The COVID shutdown basically affected me and my friends because we didn't have any social interaction whatsoever, and communicating from a screen is not like talking face to face.
What was the real epidemic during the shutdown was never talked about. And that was the epidemic of suicide, depression, drug abuse, and alcohol use.
Mentally, I just entered a deep state of depression would be the word for it. I was just really sad. I'm stuck in my house where I can't do anything. I don't remember the last time I touched a textbook. I don't remember the last time I hung out with my friends, which affects me like mentally because my friends are a big part of like my life.
I was cooped up in my room, and slowly but surely I started to get depressed. I actually started cutting myself, and everything just hurt, and I didn't have anyone there to help me out with that. I couldn't go to my friends. I felt really alone.
No, I felt helpless. There's nothing I could have done to make anything different.
Across America, suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst teenagers. And in our state, during COVID, it became the #1 leading cause of death.
It doesn't actually surprise me that there's been more suicides, which is a really sad thought, because suicide shouldn't be a normal thing. It should be shocking and it should be horrible, but the fact is, shutting down makes people depressed, and it makes people have those thoughts. I know I've had those thoughts.
A couple of years ago, a child who had been a friend of my son's took his life. And then we lost another child in our community. And I got scared. And I wanted the kids to have a voice. The parents were all being asked, how are you doing? How are the lockdowns affecting you? Here's the hybrid learning schedule, whatever. But the kids weren't being asked how they were doing.
Often when we hear these statistics, it can just be numbers and we can be numb to it. But let's put a face to the suicide epidemic. I recently heard of a story where a 12-year-old boy actually jumped from a rooftop to his death because he was so depressed during the shutdown. When the teachers and the principal decided to have a fun day for the students to help them cope with it, they had pizza. They were finally allowed to play games and sports together after a year of isolation. And the little boy came home and said, "Daddy, this was the best day ever. And I'm just so sad that my friend had to die so that we could have it." It's time for us to focus once again on the children.
The union's agenda extends far beyond the schools. For example, teacher unions made backroom deals with the CDC to keep our schools closed and our kids masked. Why did the CDC agree? The CDC is also controlled by a government union.
The teachers' union actually told the CDC that it needed to rewrite its policy so that they would delay children returning to school.
The teachers union in Los Angeles issued a laundry list of demands as their conditions for going back to in-person education.
And it feels like they don't care. They don't care about the kids with depression. They don't care about the kids with anxiety. They don't care that people have suffered and that it's made our grades horrible. It feels like they only care about themselves, and that hurts.
I am very angry that the teachers union and the CDC have colluded to keep schools closed.
This is an example of how miserably unions treat teachers. The Chicago Teachers Union went on strike again to keep schools closed in defiance of the very mayor they put into office. Good teachers didn't agree. Joseph O'Cool, who runs an after-school chess club to keep kids off the street, crossed their picket line in support of his students, and it made national news.
In the previous strikes, I already made that decision because I joined the Chicago Public Schools as a teacher, first and foremost as a teacher. And my role, I believe my role, should be inside the classroom with my students. Should not be in the picket line. I did not join CPS to be a union member. First and foremost, to be a teacher.
Look, COVID didn't break the government school system, it was already broken. Since the start of this in March of 2020, the private schools were open essentially the entire time. They were able to figure it out where they were fighting to reopen. The public school teachers unions were fighting for the opposite. They were fighting to keep their doors closed. And the main difference there is one of incentives. One of those sectors receives children's education dollars regardless of whether they open their doors for business. And you still have some of these teachers unions fighting to keep schools closed. But it's even worse than that. It's not just that they could keep your money regardless of whether they open their doors for business. The problem is that the teachers unions understood that they could hold children's education hostage, essentially in perpetuity, to secure multi-billion-dollar ransom payments from the government.
The teachers union does not speak for me. I'm not afraid to go back to school. I'm not afraid to go without a mask. I want to see my kids' faces. They need to see my face. We need to all be human together and just stop being fearful.
You know, I hesitate to say that there was a silver lining to COVID, but if anything, it's that parents suddenly had this window into what their children were learning day in and day out.
And parents were furious. We gotta go back. We gotta go back. And I was like, no. No. This is your time. Hang tight, sit back, watch from the comfort of your kitchen counter, from the comfort of your living room, what's actually being taught, right, to your kids. So I was like, don't rush it. This is your opportunity.
Some places like Tennessee, they even asked parents to sign a form saying they would not monitor their students' curriculum. Why? What are they hiding?
And I think the COVID silver lining is that America has woken up to it.
I don't understand how you can be born a racist. Like, you're 1 year old and you're saying racial slurs. Like, I don't get it.
I don't think that any kids are born racist. Babies aren't born like with any knowledge at all. Someone has to tell them what to do and what not to do.
I hear people say that, oh, well, Martin Luther King would have been for Black Lives Matter. He would have been for critical race theory. I can see so many ways that, you know, Martin Luther King would have a lot of issues with critical race theory.
Many were living Dr. King's dream until the teacher unions started pushing this divisive agenda. The National Education Association adopted business items promoting critical race theory as reasonable and appropriate, and they oppose all attempts to ban it.
I would compare critical race theory as the very antithesis of the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was effective because it was based on righteousness. It was based on human rights. It was about treating people as equals.
And there's this little thing called the Constitution that has an equal protection clause, and the equal protection clause of the Constitution protects all persons.
So they created a system that's really based in Marxism, okay? It started out as a Marxist ideal where it's actually class, but because that didn't work in America, it eventually turned into a race thing.
That just reminds me of the Cultural Revolution. Mao taught us the class struggle is everywhere. It is something we have to talk about yearly, monthly, and daily.
Critical race theory has been around for a while. It's coming from the school boards. It is coming through the government incentivizing certain types of teaching, and the social emotional learning, educational equity, culturally sensitive teaching, and they have all sorts of ways to do it and say it, and it doesn't always come to you as, oh, critical race theory.
When we learned that in our own school system they were trying to introduce something called educational equity, we began to look a little deeper, and the national media took notice.
Well, what's going on right now, equity policy is the same as critical race theory. The reason why it's so damaging is because it divides students into groups. It's not the same as equality or equal opportunity, which every parent is for and what the civil rights movement was for. Equity basically says that there has to be an equal outcome, which only happens when you gerrymander a system to favor one group over another.
They can call it whatever they want, but at the end of the day, what they are doing is creating an anti-American education system that teaches children to hate their country and to question everything that they do based on this concept of systemic racism, which is critical race theory applied.
That's what the unions and the school education system is teaching your child with critical race theory. It is not about eliminating racism in any way. It is about letting you know that certain ways of thinking are approved and certain ways of thinking are not.
We all know the Dr. King quote that has been shared, color of our skin versus the content of our character. He had a dream. This is a nightmare. It is a nightmare for our children, and it needs to end now.
It trains white children to see themselves as oppressors. They're also supposed to walk around with an endless, relentless guilt. For children of color, they're taught that they're victims and that they are in a system and born into a system to which they can't overcome.
Picture this. They're telling beautiful young children who could just grow up to be friends that if one happens to have less melanin in their skin, they're an oppressor with inherent bias, prejudged and shamed.
That argument itself is racist. And anyone who makes that argument that all minorities are victims and all white people are oppressors, that is a white supremacy argument that ought to be rejected.
I think that's child abuse. It's just robbing them of their innocence, and you're not letting them have a childhood.
I've had a good friend since I was 3 or 5 years old who's black, and now critical race theory is trying to divide us and saying that we should naturally hate each other because we have different skin colors, and that just lights a fire into my butt, and that's why I want to put a stop to critical race theory so that a lot of friendships can be saved and that we can just all get along. It was my teacher trying to say that all white people deserve to pay for what we did in slavery and how racist we are, and that makes me so mad.
Telling a beautiful young child with lighter skin tone that they are somehow personally responsible for the evil and horrors of slavery would be like telling a beautiful child of Japanese descent that they're personally responsible for Pearl Harbor. Everyone knows that doesn't make any sense. It's time for common sense.
I also have teachers say they are guilty for their whiteness. That's absurd. That's the most crazy thing I've ever heard.
You know, just one example, Wake County Public Schools, North Carolina, nobody thought it was going to happen there. Professional development, teachers were told to decenter their whiteness. They have trauma-infused yoga. That's a new one.
And this whole notion of white privilege is an absolute insult to me. And I've told some people to their face that it's an insult. And it's always interesting the reaction I get. I've had people push back and just insist that they have privilege. I want them to stop and ask yourself, do you realize what you're saying? That's just racist. You are textbook, not the new definition. You are the old 1970 definition of racist. You're not helping.
I was told I have white privilege. How can a child born in an abusive drug and alcohol abuse home who lost her entire biological family that has experienced all forms of abuse and neglect be privileged? If you found a child at 15 months in a home with holes in the floor eating cat poop, would you consider them privileged? Just asking, because when I was told that, I was so upset I cried myself to sleep. We have to stop the stereotypes and bitterness towards groups because it gets us nowhere but divided.
No, ma'am, I don't think I have white privilege. The only privilege I have is getting to be in America.
Just the absolute disingenuousness, and then claiming at the end of the day that all the problems in our schools stem from systemic racism. How dare you? You are blaming something that is an abstract concept while totally, absolutely letting yourselves off the hook.
No, racism isn't worse today than it was back then. Of course not.
No. America is not systemically racist. There are racist people. They come in all shades of melanin. That's a sin of the heart. There's nothing we can do to legislate that away.
All of these changes that are so progressive are actually completely regressive.
I think what we're doing is we're setting ourselves up to go backwards. Let's don't do that. Let's move forward.
Parent Kyla Posey says she can't believe a principal thought separating students according to race was a good idea.
Just disbelief that I was having this conversation in 2020 with a person that looks just like me, a black woman. It's segregating classrooms. You cannot segregate classrooms. You can't do it.
Well, I don't have any guilt for who I am or how God made me, but our schools tell us that I, just because of the color of my skin, am immediately racist to black people, to minorities, and I've also been called a neo-Nazi, a fascist multiple times on social media.
I have a special treat for white America who feel guilty. I'm a self-certified racial exorcist. So therefore, I can just wave my hand and you're exempt. Racism has been exorcised from your body. You can go on down and live your life. I'm sure you feel better.
A story out of Nevada shows just how fundamentally wrong CRT really is. A student was told that he had to confess his white guilt. The catch? He was biracial and his mother is black. When he refused to comply, they threatened to fail him.
If you're biracial, you should denounce the white part of your being as oppressive and embrace the black side that is a victim. I mean, it's really getting down to the point of just idiocy.
I was told, no, you're not far enough on the journey. You need to examine in your heart further, that if you look closer, you'll uncover some biases. And then I just didn't know how to respond. My kids are minorities. I'm married to a minority.
My children are biracial, so what am I to tell them, to be oppressed or you are the oppressor? How can I?
Our family is a mixed race family. I am married to a white man. We have these two beautiful children who are now adults, and we have a grandchild who has one black grandparent. He adores his grandfather, and he adores his other grandparents. And I don't know what it would do to his mind to have people telling him those white grandparents are mean, evil, racist people, and your black grandmother, who, despite the fact that she's a successful lawyer and appears to be happy, is really an oppressed victim.
Racism is racism. And you cannot use racism to eradicate racism. Critical race theory really is racism in reverse.
That idea that we all should be colorblind is not a racist concept. And those students have every right to think that way. You can't take that away, and no one else should be taking that away from them.
That's not how kids act or think at all. Kids look at someone and judge them by their character. I feel like the world could have a lot more friendships if people didn't just treat someone differently because of the color of their skin. We just got to know them and see if they're a nice person or not.
A viral father-daughter TikTok video perfectly showed the true nature of children. They don't see color. They just want to be friends.
Daddy teaches you can be anything in this world that you want to be, right? Don't Daddy teach you that?
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if you're black or white or any color.
Doesn't matter if you're black, white, brown, yellow. Right?
Black.
And how we treat people is based on who they are and not what color they are.
And if they're nice and smart.
See? This is how children think right here.
I've had several encounters with woke young white progressives, bless their hearts, and I say that in the Southern sense.
Black Lives Matter and them being just white millennials. They think they know what they're talking about by raising a fist. I went through a Wendy's drive-thru and this white woman, she was like, Black Lives Matter. And she was like, we stand with you. I was in complete shock. I was like, what are you doing? You sound so dumb. You don't even know my name. Like, it's just, I find it ridiculous, and it's just like really humiliating for them. But yeah, that's my viewpoint on that.
And when I was a girl growing up in Arkansas, if I got in trouble in school, I get in trouble with the teacher, I get in trouble with my aunt who lived next door, I get in trouble with my neighbor down the street before I got to my mom and dad. At the church, the pastor would preach about it Sunday. I was worn out from being in trouble by the time I got home. And I was like, well, is there nobody that doesn't know I got in trouble? You know, and my dad would say no.
The decision was made that there was a disparity in discipline between primarily black students and white students. No one's bothered to dig under the covers to figure out, okay, is there a disparity? If there is, what's the cause of it? With the current narrative, the cause is it's because white people don't like black students. And so what that has meant is behavior that should get nipped in the bud doesn't get nipped in the bud, because if you, especially under the Obama administration, I'm sorry, should I have said that?
I think one of the worst things that happened under the Obama administration was the Department of Education giving a directive to schools that it must end the discrimination of students by discipline, because a disproportionate number of black students were being expelled from school as compared to white.
And with restorative justice in the classroom, it made it harder for teachers to discipline students. It made it almost impossible to suspend children who were dangerous and truly unruly. And they were able to dominate the classrooms, and there were teacher injuries, as well as situations where the children who came to school to learn were so intimidated by the bullies that couldn't be suspended that they themselves had higher absenteeism.
My school district was trying to lower the suspensions of African American students. By doing that, I felt they were doing it in a fraudulent way. I don't think we were addressing the behavior correctly, just because we wanted to close the numbers.
Yes, the suspension rates went down, but the violence against teachers or the students went up. And in one case, 50% of the teachers walked out of the school because they were terrorized by the students.
Right now in schools, it is not safe to be a teacher. It's not safe physically to be a teacher because the discipline issues are not taken care of, and it's easy to walk into a situation where you can be hurt.
The plight of teachers and kids was perfectly articulated by an award-winning Wisconsin teacher who resigned her beloved position because of policies that turned her school into a war zone.
A teacher was taken away in an ambulance with a bleeding head wound caused by a fight among 3 students. Another teacher was physically attacked by students trying to set off a deadly allergic reaction on purpose, causing her throat to close and her to struggle to breathe. A student was held down on a table and his legs put into vice grips so that other students could take his shoes. A student had his pants and underwear pulled down, exposing him in a crowded hallway of students. Another student approached a group of teachers and pulled his pants down and touched himself inappropriately, while laughing at their requests to stop. Male and female students this year are slapped on the buttocks, pitched in the chest, kicked in the groin. Just last week, 2 students laid on a table in the classroom and kissed each other heavily and pretended to have sex while a substitute teacher tried to get them to stop. All of those things I just mentioned happened in the month of May. I would not survive another year in the toxic setting at Washington. I must resign, even though I have a broken heart, because I cannot survive in this unhealthy and unsafe environment any longer.
When you take discipline issues and you remove the process of intervening and changing the behaviors of students, you don't get better behaved students, you get chaos.
I've got a student in my class and he attempted to strangle another student. And I actually had to physically intervene. And then this was handled administratively, not as a crime, because the viewpoint is that kids don't commit crimes.
At the highest levels, they are proactively promoting policies that undercut their teachers' authority and that put them in danger.
If we don't fix these policies, we're going to allow a segment of our population to do whatever they want in school, and they're not going to be held accountable.
Like every parent that ever had a child murdered, in probably anywhere in life, everyone thinks that it can't happen to them.
It's every parent's worst nightmare, and we all remember seeing the images on the news of friends and classmates mourning Meadow's death.
It's an M for Meadow.
M for Meadow.
My daughter would want everyone to know what happened to her and why it happened.
The killer couldn't have been more clear about who he was and what he wanted to do.
Today is the day.
You're all going to die.
They knew that his nickname was Crazy Boy. He was the one that was going to shoot the school up, but they didn't arrest him.
Every step of the way he telegraphed that to the people around him in the school, and every single time they made the obviously morally wrong decision about him.
There were so many failures, and I wanted the world to know what happened. And my daughter was murdered at the school.
This was the most preventable mass murder in American history. And it happened for a reason. It happened because of policies that started in Parkland but have spread to your kid's school.
There was a running joke in STEM that the administrators just did not care about STEM.
There were signs and people knew that there were troubled individuals and that this might take place.
To kind of set the stage, it was our last period, our last class of the day, and we were watching The Princess Bride in class. Devin steps into the door frame, pulls the pistol out and says, "Nobody effing move." Kendrick shot out of his seat, threw the shooter up against the whiteboard.
And then you see muzzle flashes and you hear gunfire.
In less than 30 seconds, it was done. 16 shots were fired, students wounded. The other one came in, forcing people to the ground. Kendrick jumped up and ran and pinned him against the wall, was shot fatally. And, while Kendrick was laying on the floor at the crime scene, they were making phone calls to attorneys. And we were up until like 5 in the morning.
But I didn't sleep. I was waiting for him to come home.
Yeah, we were waiting for him to come home. We were waiting to hear the Jeep.
I mean, these people are morally challenged. They're beholden not to parents, not to kids, but to their ideological interests and to these ideological pressure groups. And, when we talk about the ACLU, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the NAACP, they're all part of one broader institutional juggernaut on the left that the teachers' unions are inextricably linked to.
The superintendent, before my daughter was buried, was blaming the NRA and we need more gun control.
So after the Parkland school shooting, kind of two groups of students came forth and one got a lot more media attention than the other, right? One group said, we blame the gun, we blame the NRA, we blame Republicans, we blame Trump. Let's march on Washington and make national policy change. The other group said, we all knew that he was going to do this. We knew it was him while it was happening. He threatened to kill us, he threatened to rape us, he threatened to kill our families. we saw something, we said something, and they did nothing.
So the vigil that was held at Highlands Ranch High School, I was going there because, you know, my parents felt it was a good idea to have the support of the community and to show your support for the community, you know? Like, I was one of the kids that got shot. I was there with Kendrick.
The vigil was supposed to be for the students to get together, have a candlelight ceremony in remembrance of Kendrick and what took place. That's not what happened.
We became paralyzed by the NRA.
It was organized by Moms Demand Action.
Gun violence is now so commonplace.
The organization slowly consumed and took over the vigil. Many of Kendrick's friends were brave enough to stand up and shut it down because it kept becoming more and more political.
Wait, I'm gonna stop everybody.
I just recognized that this wasn't celebrating Kendrick's life really at all.
It was a shame that a lot of people, there would have been a lot of people able to speak on his behalf that did not get to.
We can't be used for a reason for gun control. We are a people, not a statement.
This was not a vigil. This was merely a political stunt. This is not what we wanted for Kendrick. We didn't want Kendrick to be a problem.
Knowing Kendrick personally, without saying anything explicitly, he wouldn't be happy. He would have walked out with those students or would have turned his back and would have been like, shut up, this is stupid.
Parents need to talk to their teachers and ask them, hey, is there a student in my class, in my kid's class, who shouldn't be there? Are you supported when you bring discipline problems to your principal? Are things being swept under the rug in your school? And hopefully the answer is no, but if the answers to these questions are yes, then you need to talk to other parents, raise awareness, and go to your local school board and address it with them.
They're teaching these kids X-rated sex acts.
They teach about anal sex, they teach about oral sex, on putting the child's mouth on somebody's anus. We teach the children how to wash their hands after they use the restroom, and they're teaching our children how to put their mouth on their anus.
I think that the overall goal is to desensitize children to all of these sexual ideas, all this sexual content, and give them the feeling that everything's okay, everything goes. And it has been effective.
This is about grooming our kids, not educating them on biology.
I took a parenting safety class around preventing sexual abuse of children, and we know that these are grooming conversations, teaching a child what is pleasurable to an adult.
It's okay to be touched here and there. They could be molested by a sexual predator and think it's okay.
Well, the material that we're teaching is not age appropriate, certainly not for 11 and 12-year-olds. One of the games that stands out the most for me, because it horrified me that little kids would be singled out and put in front of the entire class. Each player would have an index card held over their head, and let's say the term was masturbation. And the student's team members shouting clues at this student to try to get the student to guess the term. Imagine being an 11-year-old girl with an entire class of girls and boys shouting at you clues for you to guess the term masturbation. Another game that we were instructed to use with the students was to instruct them in the proper use of condoms. Each student would have a condom, and at the word go, each member from a team would run up to the table, put the condom on this penis model, and then run back to their group so that the next student could do it.
So when Sarah was 11, I found a piece of paper in her folder, and I couldn't believe the words that were on this paper. We're talking extremely uncomfortable words. Words like masturbation, erection, ejaculation. Words like that for an 11-year-old girl.
was called Comprehensive Sexual Education, and that was the key word, and I got a hold of all the sex ed curriculums. These books are found on the resource links for the kids. This is for elementary school. This book is for 4-year-olds, and this particular book that's available to kids online, it talks about deeper manual sex. What is it? How do you do it? And that's actually fisting. How do you insert your fist in somebody's anus? Because they're teaching this to 10-year-olds and the teachers know that this activity will make the children very uncomfortable, the teachers are trained to make this a fun activity, and one of the ways that they're teaching them to make this a fun activity is by yelling out the different slang words that they've heard used to refer to the male and female body parts. And I'll just read you some of them. I have always been very uncomfortable even reading these out loud in my presentations, but I'll do it now. For the male, cock, dick, prick, schlong, wee-wee, wanger, meat, pisser, tool, frankenfurk, thing, pecker, dinky, peony, balls, nuts, eggs, rocks, jewels, cubes, seeds, stones, hangers, bangers, things, cajones. For the female, clit, bud, pea, man in the boat, spot, pussy, cunt, muff, stuff, quim, box, beaver, honeypot, hole, thing, snatch, pontang, pooty, slits, twat. For our 10-year-old children. Sorry.
I mean, they're even telling kids to experiment with different sexes, like in 7th and 8th grade. I know of a student that had a science teacher, and the science teacher told that student, hey, why don't you try you're still discovering your sexuality, why don't you try having sex with different genders?
You can choose your gender. Do you like trucks? To a little girl? Well, you might be a boy. Have you ever thought about what it would be like to be a boy?
Is that child pondering the thought of being the opposite gender? I think so. I think it's happening to our kids because we see an explosion of children experimenting with their sexuality.
It teaches boys how to masturbate. Even in this book, it teaches how to masturbate each other, 2 boys together. It shows how to measure each other's penises. I mean, it goes on and on.
I came from the porn industry. I came from the grooming, the sex trafficking, the exploitation. Imagine my surprise when I saw my old world in our current sex education curriculum for children.
Healthy Teen Network is an organization that actually gets funded by the CDC, and they help train sex educators for public education. Many of our districts are working with Healthy Teen Network for training opportunities.
During COVID, the Healthy Teen Network provided resources for schools and teachers to use online. One of the lessons taught in 2020 was called 5 Tips for Your Sexual Health During COVID-19. The tips are outrageous. Tip number 1 tells children to sext. It claims women feel more empowered from sexting, and the lesson provides 54 ideas for sexting that include talking porn, handcuffs, and threesomes. The second tip was use solo sex, or masturbation, and then the lesson taught kids how to do it. The third tip was to look at porn. It claimed that porn is a healthy part of sexuality, and they provided links to videos and a toolkit. The fourth tip was to date yourself. And the fifth tip was to go online and engage with sex experts who will teach you, quote, how to use sex toys, tips for dirty talk, communication and consent, or how race, class, gender, and power show up in sexuality, end quote.
After we researched thoroughly, we found that it was Planned Parenthood, the ACLU, teachers' unions, and other very far left advocate groups that had lobbied and funded the California Healthy Youth Act and promoted programs like Teen Talk and the curriculum that we're now forced to provide to the kids.
Even though teacher unions push this sexualized content, most teachers would never teach it. But when teachers refuse to teach it, the schools can bring in so-called experts. That's why Planned Parenthood has contracts with school districts all over the nation.
For the schools to be able to teach the comprehensive sexual education, their IT department actually has to take off the restrictions off the teachers' computers so they're able to access these things, or else they would not be able to.
We already have obscenity laws. Most people don't even know that schools, they're exempt.
When they say that maybe the content is not age appropriate, but the way that they're presenting it is age appropriate by putting it in cartoon form, they're using the Amaze videos, and that's actually a resource, a supplemental resource that they call, or a link, so you might not actually find it in the curriculum documents if they do show them to parents.
Activist teachers are using these cartoons to discuss X-rated sex acts with children.
Yes, come on, yes, oh yes, aha!
In one particular Amaze video, they are showing an interaction between a male and a female, and the female has a little white shirt on, and her buttons burst open, and her very large breasts pop out, and then his penis turns into a lasso that he lassos around to go catch her, and then they're in bed together. And then even if you look at the bedpost, it's formed as penises and breasts.
I really need to figure out what is going on in our little daughter's classroom. She's in first grade. The teacher put on the Queer Kid Stuff video, and it's put on by activists, and they teach from everything from homosexuality to transgender ideas to drag queens. We got forwarded a teacher email. And in the teacher email, it says, teachers, we want you to intentionally weave gender fluidity into every aspect of your lessons. In test questions, essay prompts.
Math.
Yeah, we said, what does math have to do with this?
So I immediately responded to the teacher's email saying, I'd like to see the curriculum in advance. He let me know that he didn't have the curriculum. I should reach out to the principal. She said, well, I don't have that information. So I went back to the teacher, it cut it back and forth, and finally found out it was a pediatrician who was coming on campus to teach. And I called that pediatrician's office multiple times and asked to see the curriculum in advance, and there was never any response. What was really frustrating is that then it was taught, and I found out afterwards, and never really had an opportunity to opt him out.
Something happened in Rockland, California. There was a kindergarten boy that came to the classroom towards the end of the school year who was going to announce to the classroom that he was now going to be identifying as a girl. And what he did with the help of his parents and the school administrators was he went into the restroom at school, changed into a dress, and came out and was now being called by a female name. The children were traumatized. They really didn't understand it, actually. Some of them cried at the thought of becoming the opposite gender. Some of them didn't say anything to their parents because they really didn't have an understanding of what was happening. But it exploded across the state, across the country. It became national news.
I can't believe that we live in a world where not being okay with this has put you in such a difficult situation that you can't show your face. I think that says a world about what we're talking about here. So Susan, tell everybody what your experience was with your child.
My daughter was taking a bath, and she got up out of the water, and her hair was slicked back, and she saw a reflection of herself in the drain in the bathtub, and she started shaking and crying because she thought that she looked like a boy. And she was like, Mommy, I don't want to be a boy. I turned into a boy. I really wish that I had had the opportunity to talk to her about this first, and even the opportunity to opt out, and maybe keep her home for the day if they had to discuss this.
Obviously you should have that choice.
And all of this was done without the parents knowing that the child was going to have a coming out announcement in the classroom.
in teachers' meetings multiple times in 2 different school districts where we were specifically told the parents are to be kept in the dark. So for example, if a student wants to go by a different name, let's say a name of a different gender, right? You're not supposed to let the parent know that. And so they've had situations where a parent will, or the school will call home and ask for the name of the new name, right? And the parent has no idea what they're talking about. And it's, I don't know, who are you talking? And they'll use the other pronouns and they have no idea. And we are told, don't tell the parent.
I feel mad. This shouldn't be happening. I don't know why they think it's okay to do this without parents' knowledge.
I have had gay and lesbian parents and extremely liberal parents reach out to me in emails saying our family has been devastated. Our children or we have a child who's identifying as another gender. They've totally shut us out. They're doing things on the sly without us knowing. They're changing their body. They're wanting to mutilate their bodies, and their parents are they're heartbroken. This is tearing families apart, whether it be a gay family or not. These are families, and they should all be respected.
I think we need more transparency laws. So I know that there are some organizations that are fighting for transparency laws. So what parents need to do is ask their district to put all lessons online so that parents can look at them. All curriculum, everything your teacher is teaching your child should be able to be online.
I started Parents United America a couple of years ago because right here in Colorado, they shoved through the comprehensive sex ed on the very last day of the legislature, despite hundreds of parents showing up to make their voices heard.
When I testified in front of legislatures in Colorado about the sex ed bill, I was really disappointed. They did not listen.
So after that, I helped write and introduce a bill called Sex Ed Transparency. They didn't send it to the Health Committee. They didn't send it to the Education Committee. They sent it to the Veteran and Military Affairs Committee. Why? Because it's commonly known as the Kill Committee, where they send bills that they don't want to see the light of day and they don't want people to know anything about. We have so stepped through the looking glass that you see people from every walk of life joining together and saying this is no longer common sense. I've been connecting with self-proclaimed radical liberal feminists who are stating that everything they fought for since the 60s is being eliminated. Title IX, its original intention was to allow girls the opportunity to compete in sports and get scholarships. That's being eliminated as they're now being forced to compete against biological males.
The first race that I competed against a transgender athlete was during my freshman year. And once the gun went off, the transgender athlete took off flying and left all of us girls in the dust. I knew right then and there that some girls would be missing out on great opportunities to succeed, and that women could be completely eradicated from their own sports.
The state of Connecticut's Athletic Association now allows biological males to compete in women's sports, and that has had the effect of displacing girls like Selena from podium spots and from advancing to the next level of competition. It really has created an unlevel playing field for women's sports in Connecticut.
I know that I'm not the only girl who has missed out on opportunities. There are countless other girls who have lost meets and titles, and their drive to compete as hard as they can because they know that they will never be good enough to compete against these athletes.
You're not so far out of the system, but what are teachers being taught today as far as their worldview, and what's being pushed on them in the training?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. What's been pushed on teachers is the indoctrination. The school system wants to indoctrinate us teachers first before we indoctrinate your kids.
There are 2 types of teachers, one that are real teachers and one that are activists that got a career in teaching.
Some of these activist teachers can't wait to get on social media to brag about their indoctrination of little kids.
Okay, so during third period, we have announcements and they do the Pledge of Allegiance. Except for the fact that my room does not have a flag. It used to be there, but I took it down during COVID because it made me uncomfortable. In the meantime, I tell this kid, we do have a flag in the class that you can pledge your allegiance to. And he like looks around and he goes, oh, that one?
There's a big difference between your child's second grade teacher and the people that are running the machine, running the system.
Schools are starting to teach children what to think, not how to think. And that to me is a marked distinction from what it used to be.
A healthy learning environment requires individuals to wrestle with uncomfortable ideas. It's not about indoctrinating people with the right answers to all the questions.
This indoctrination and social engineering is getting woven into every subject. Math, English, science, even music.
I teach music, and somehow even music has become political. Even music has become a platform for debate. So one of my professional development sessions, my group was discussing whether or not we should teach the Star Spangled Banner. They were having a debate about it. And their consensus, their argument was, well, a lot of our kids are immigrants and they just, it's not going to really strike a chord with them and it's going to make them feel uncomfortable.
I don't want to lower the standards in my classroom for identity politics. So I will not teach about composers because of their skin color or their sexual orientation. I will teach my students about the great ones, and it doesn't matter who they slept with or what their skin color was.
You would think that in teaching physics, you would want to teach the greats. You would want to teach Einstein, Galileo, Newton, and look at their discoveries and how it's changed the world. No, you should teach about these ancient scientists, such as Imhotep, which I was like, I don't know who that is. Well, it turns out this was an ancient Egyptian, but the good news, the idea that was held through is that this was a minority person. Didn't even teach physics as I do, doesn't pertain to the information, but again, changing the whole content just so that science can teach racial identity.
If people don't like the values upon which this country was founded, if we don't have a common thread that holds us together, a common story, a common history, then it's a lot easier to break things up, to fragment things, and to come up with a whole new system.
We have organizations like Antifa, where you have young people who are willing to burn down police stations, who are willing to destroy people's businesses.
The media is full of images of the chaos in our streets.
You have to ask, why are they doing that? It's because of the indoctrination that they've received in their education.
It seems like some of the public schools are just trying to create activists.
This is not a conspiracy theory. This is all out in the open. They are training your children to be political activists.
In fact, Project Veritas recently got a teacher on camera admitting this very point, that the indoctrination is unfortunately working.
I have 180 days to turn them into revolutionaries. How do you do that? How do you scare the out of them? I have an Antifa flag on my wall.
The shift has focused from making sure kids know how to read and write to now making sure kids are activists for the left.
They're being used to push a political agenda. Most of these children are very young, many of them as young as kindergarten age, 5 years old.
I would say that's like the #1 goal in our public schools in California, is to turn our students into brainwashed activists.
The pernicious thing about so many of these programs is that they sound really great. They have wonderful names hiding the real agenda. For instance, No Place for Hate. This is being taught to 1.4 million children across the country, and their parents have no idea the real agenda. I'm going to quote it because this is from the Educator's Handbook. The real goal is to assist educators to teach through a lens of diversity, bias, and social justice and affect systemic change. This program highly encourages schools to move beyond kindness to social justice. Under the category 10 Ways Youth Can Engage in Activism, they coach teachers to do the following exercises. Teach children how to engage in walkouts and protests.
Children have been brought out of school, out of the classroom, to come to protest.
Teach children how to create chants and slogans.
It's like they've already got coached on all of the leftist chants. I just think it's crazy that these kids are chanting no hate, and they're saying that I hate Donald Trump.
I'm supportive of my daughter, and this is what she learned in school, so.
They even encourage children to report each other. Children being taught to report on one another, their teachers, and their parents.
The kids get praised if they repeat what the teacher has said, and extra praise if they're putting someone who has spoken out into their place.
It has nothing to do with teaching our children and everything to do with indoctrination.
Well, Abraham Lincoln said that the philosophy taught in the schoolroom will become the philosophy in politics in the next generation.
And it only takes one generation of students to go down the wrong path for us to lose them. We all know this.
Once they're old enough, they don't have to question the government. When they're old enough, they don't have to question anything at all. Oh, you're going to be shut down for the rest of the year? Okay. Oh, you have to cover your face for the rest of the year because we told you so, even though you don't need to because you're perfectly healthy? Okay. So this is why everything that's happening in the school system is happening. It's all connected.
There is a reason why Generation Z, these kids, are becoming further and further left.
When I hear about teachers and the agenda to dumb down the curriculum, particularly for children of color and Black children very specifically, that to me is so disturbing. The literacy rates in communities of color, particularly for Black children, is atrocious.
I've been asked that I should teach kids based on the color of their skin, that I should look at them as a group, and that this group of students should be treated different than another. And it's just so unfair that all students have an equal opportunity to become the best person that they can be.
It's really sad because you have to think about this. We're in a low-income community. Poverty level is sky high, and these kids really want to learn. We have these union teachers that feel that they have the right to tell an entire class of mostly Hispanic children to look at themselves in the mirror, that they are worthless.
I will never allow anybody to ingrain that idea into my children's minds, because that's not what I came to this country for.
The goal of education is to educate.
Less than 1/3 of America's school children are proficient in anything.
It was clear that the idea was to destroy the level of education we were getting because we were not filling the mold of having kids that were underperforming. You had minority kids that were overperforming and excelling, and that was what had to be destroyed.
The very job of schools they're failing at, and that is academics. We're seeing plummeting test scores. America used to be #1 across the world, and now amongst industrialized nations, we're falling to 18th in math and 13th in reading. That's unacceptable.
Just look at the data that we're seeing. We're seeing children more dumbed down than they've ever been. And that's not a political issue, right? Democrats and Republicans, libertarians and Greens, they all want their children to be able to read and to write and do math.
States like Oregon have eliminated all standards for graduation. Now they're graduating young people who can't even read or write.
Democratic Oregon Governor Kate Brown facing backlash for pushing racial equality over getting a quality education after she quietly signed a new bill that gets rid of math, reading, and writing requirements in order for high school students to graduate. The governor's office says it will help students of color, but she is being accused of dumbing down schools to appease far left liberals. So, Dana, I think this is a tragedy for everybody. Because you're lowering the standards rather than thinking kids could rise to the challenge.
To me, it's child abuse. And as a taxpayer, I'm mad because the return on investment is not good enough.
In the name of equity, many schools are ending advanced placement and honors classes. That's a real shame. We should be empowering all students to achieve their highest potential.
Here in Loudoun County, they're going to do away with the advanced diploma, because when you look at advanced diploma stats, Black students, Hispanic students are less represented. So they'll just eliminate them. What does that do for the students that want to get an advanced diploma, regardless of their skin color, right? So you've got minority students that want an advanced diploma can no longer get it. You just took the choice away from them and disenfranchised them, and they wanted to work hard and accomplish that goal.
The district decided to no longer focus on academics as much as social emotional learning, which is basically inserting a lot of leftist teachings.
Well, they told us that at the very beginning. They told us, you know, we're academics in school, this is not important.
Parents are not very aware of social emotional learning or mindfulness. In some schools, they'll have mindfulness assemblies. So all of this goes together with trying to control and socially condition a child to think the way the group thinks.
I believe that public schools today are starting to teach children that America is not really a good place, and they're teaching children only the negative aspects instead of the good ones as well.
One of the most interesting things I'm finding today is that because of the new approach to race, that minority scholars are not being held to the same standards as others, and people are being touted and elevated, given platforms that they don't deserve. And Nicole Hannah-Jones comes to mind. She is the New York Times journalist that really created the 1619 Project.
The 1619 Project is being used to rewrite history, and some school districts are receiving funding to teach it.
Now, Columbia Public Schools agreed to be part of Pulitzer Center's 1619 Project. Teams of teachers will get $5,000 grants to develop sample lesson plans based on the historical and journalistic materials provided by the project.
1619 is a false document. I mean, it's pseudo history. They make the false claim that the Revolutionary War was fought to protect slavery, and then they had to retract it.
It was full of historical inaccuracies, such as the founding date of our country was 1619, and people that know history, American history, know that at that time we were a British colony, that our nation has a birth date, and that birth date is 1776.
It is revisionist history. It is based on lies. America was not born or created to support slavery. In fact, we have an entire history, mind you, white men who were not slave owners from the North who fought hard and long to end slavery.
Belittling all forms of American culture and discouraging the teaching of American history are staples of the communist goals.
It doesn't fit the narrative of the political left, and because it doesn't fit the narrative that we're all victims, those stories are not allowed to be told and heard. They need to be told and heard now by all of our children.
That there is no such thing as utopian history. There is no such thing as perfect history. But if you only look at the negative of history and you don't look at the positives that come from those negatives, then you're missing the story. So when people say that if you're opposed to critical race theory, you don't want to teach history, that's a straw man argument. It is completely ridiculous.
I would say, if you erase history, how will we learn or evolve from our mistakes?
And so that requires a deep background and knowledge of history, and we can learn our best lessons by the failures or the triumphs of previous generations or different civilizations.
Throughout all of the changes in policy that are happening at our schools right now, it's very evident to me that the end goal is a dumbing down of our students, that at the end of their high school career, they'll know much less than any of us knew when we graduated.
And that is nothing to celebrate. In fact, it's inexcusable. We all want children to succeed, and a good education, not indoctrination, is the key.
In an effort to expose the unions as the root cause of the problems in our schools and the bullying of teachers, I was asked to address the nation at the 2020 Republican National Convention.
I'm here to give voice to America's great teachers because our voices have been silenced for decades by unions who claim to represent us. They do not. When other dedicated teachers and I served within the unions, we spoke up in defense of children, parents, scientific fact, and American values. For our trouble, we were brutalized, booed off the platform, barred from committees, shouted down, and even spit upon by union leaders.
The day you become a teacher in St. Paul, you're part of a union. It's just, that's the way it goes. No one questions it. You just sign your union card, you're gonna have union dues taken out, and that's it. It's like American as apple pie in baseball.
They told me, if you want to teach, you'll sign.
We were forced to join the union. We didn't have a choice. We had to be a part of the union. So as the years went by, the dues got greater and greater, but the salaries didn't.
Who do the unions represent? I believe that they represent a small number of teachers that want to reshape society regardless of how the families and the other teachers feel about the direction they want to take us.
I was able to figure out that they were giving teacher dues money to Planned Parenthood. I said, I'm done.
After being forced to fund unions for 25 years and having them misrepresent me in every way and bring harm to my students, I'd had enough. So I joined as lead plaintiff in a lawsuit to end forced unionism for all government employees in the United States of America. Our case was heard at the U.S. Supreme Court in 2016. As you can imagine, our lawsuit did not go over well with the unions. One union president called us the spawn of Satan.
I came to Hershey in 1967, but it wasn't long before I realized that I was in a unionized school. One day I was letting the children out of the room. I closed the door. Knock, knock, knock. Here were these men in black suits and black shoes, looked like the mafia to me. And they started asking me why I didn't want to join the union. I said, well, what do you do for teachers? Do you do anything for students? And they looked at one another, and then they looked back at me as if I had asked the wrong question. And finally, I said, will something bad happen to me if I don't join? And they couldn't answer that. This is called bullying. Bully.
They're not interested in tolerance.
When I decided to be with my students and cross the picket line, I was the one bullied. And yet I was trying to stand up for my students.
I got threatened. People would drive by my house and throw things out the window. They would call and tell me I needed to shut up.
One of my friends got spit on. I got screamed at. People are so scared to vote.
Some of those members are very hostile.
Hostile doesn't even come close to describing the disgusting behavior of teacher union leaders who masquerade as teachers and overpower them. Union activists are a small minority with a really loud voice. Many have seen the video of Michael Mulgrew, president of United Federation of Teachers, openly threatening violence at a union meeting while Randy Weingarten laughs in the background. This is a great example of their bully tactics.
I'm gonna grab it right back out of that cold, twisted, sick hand and say it is mine. You do not take what is mine. And I'm gonna punch you in the face and push you in the dirt.
It's scary to think that these big organizations can destroy your livelihood. And so yes, the teachers union is really powerful.
I went to a school board meeting, I said my piece. Almost immediately, I was faced with infractions I never had before after a 15-year career. I had numerous infractions I was facing after having 0.
I was accused of not being fit for teaching. I was accused of hurting a student. I was accused of not being a quality leader. I was accused of telling lies. I was accused of being a revisionist. None of those are true. All the things I was accused of was all because I was opposed to being forced to be a union member. It's not okay.
If a teacher stands up to oppose these changes, to oppose the new policies, the changes in curriculum, the bad discipline policies, you'll be ostracized. You'll be attacked by your fellow teachers. Really, the union looks at you and they make your life very uncomfortable.
And so we want to make sure that teachers know that you do have another option.
And we have tons of positive options. We started For Kids and Country to expose union abuses, give voice to good teachers, and to reconnect teachers and parents so they can restore our schools. Unions have purposely divided us and are the money and muscle behind the nightmares in our schools, including the elections of corrupt school board members. If we can help teachers to exit the unions and adopt each teacher we know, we can restore our schools overnight.
The Teachers Union and the ACLU came up with a document called the Safe School Coalition. In this document, it literally said that parents are barriers.
They told educators that parents are dissenters. Well, the reality is we're not dissenters, we're the parents.
Their whole goal is to intimidate, to silence the opposition, to try and win through these means.
We have made a decision and a recommendation to recess this meeting, and I'll turn it back to President Greenberg.
I didn't come up with this term. I've got a good friend who came up with that term, and because they are so fancy and most of them are rich and they live in big houses, big fancy houses, they're probably sipping on Chardonnay all the time. So he put those two together and said, they're Chardonnay Antifa, and that one stuck.
So Chardonnay Antifa was a term that came out of this Facebook group in the aftermath. You know, really what it is just people out there that they operate in the shadows of Facebook. They don't want to have debates with you. Instead, they want to cancel people. They want to send letters to your work saying you're a racist. They want to publicly expose you. They want to call everybody's a racist or a fascist or a sexist. For people that are supposedly for diversity, equity, and inclusion, they are the most intolerant, hateful group of individuals that I've ever seen.
There was a Facebook group with a teacher. I might be able to, let me see if I can find it. There was a teacher that posted on a Facebook group, "I'm so tired of hearing about special needs kids. They'll be fine. They were retarded before COVID, they'll still be retarded after. Sounds like someone doesn't want to deal with their special needs kid. Sorry you got pregnant and had a retarded kid. Your problem, not mine. And yes, I'm a teacher." Who can say stuff like this and still have a job afterwards? Taking care of kids. People can call your kid retarded. It's completely not okay. People like that, they don't, it's not, if you ask me, man, the fact that there's people that protecting people that act like that, you know, I don't know.
Those teachers, because of union due process rules, are almost impossible to get rid of and to remove from a classroom. So you can give them low evaluations, But then you have to fight with the union boss over the reasons that that evaluation resulted in a negative score. To move them out of your district can take 3 years. It can cost a district about $1 million or more. Large school districts have what are called rubber rooms. And rubber rooms are offices where they basically get paid to go to work and not teach.
Unions defend incompetent and even abusive teachers all the time. One teacher decided to sunbathe during recess in front of the children, topless. She wasn't fired. They simply moved her to a different school. This is called the dance of the lemons.
During my education experience, 2 of my greatest teachers I ever had lost their job due to the last in, first out policies that the teachers' unions brought into the education system, while 2 of the worst teachers I ever had kept their jobs.
I know teachers who won Teacher of the Year, but lost their job for the crime of being new hires.
As an administrator of a charter school, I have great advantages in administering and managing the faculty that my principal friends who are principals in other regular public schools just don't have. For example, my teachers are not union members. And so what that means is I can treat them all on a truly professional basis. This is something to keep in mind. The purpose of joining a union is to abandon the elements of professionalism that any true profession enjoys. What they produce on the court or in the courtroom is a function of how they get rewarded and compensated. Our highest performers in the school get the biggest pay raises. And then those who still have a ways to go have lots of opportunities for improvement, as we say. We paint a very clear picture of what those opportunities for improvement are. If they get better, they make more money. That's the way the world works and the way it ought to work. Those who join teachers' unions, they are paying for a system that prevents them from being treated like professionals. They are all treated the same. That is what a union does.
When there came to be a question over a teacher, maybe that should be promoted because they had the same time and they had the same ratings and so forth, you know how they determined that? They would flip a coin. Yeah, actually in the contract, in black and white, it said that they would flip a coin to determine the outcome. To me, that was astonishing.
Choice in education is so important because parents are looking for something a little different for their children.
With charter schools, with home schools, with private schools, with other schools, so that the union-controlled government schools are not their only options.
The reality is school choice can benefit families and teachers at the same time.
I've been in this business for a long time and trying to promote school choice in ways that empowers families to find, seek, and drive the greatest educational quality for their kids. And at every level where I've been involved in this battle, in this fight, and it has been at every level for me, there's really only one impetus for the opposition, and it is teachers' unions throughout the country.
In our experience, the union-controlled school boards have been hostile to us opening a charter school and to charter schools in general, because when a charter school is opened in a community, it gives the parent a choice to pull their child out of that neighborhood school or that district-run school. And when that happens, the money that is funded, the money that follows that child will come to the charter school. And that upsets the power structure of the union.
Our school, Gompers Prep Academy, was a failing school. Before it became a public, non-union charter, it was the failing school. It was drug-ridden, gang violence, everything you can think of.
Gompers back in the day was very bad. Like, it was literally a war zone. SWAT team would have to come onto campus. Teachers would lock themselves inside the classrooms during lunchtime because there was too many fights. There needed to be change, and the change that needed was we needed the union out and the district to back off.
The families, the parents got together, community, and fought for it to be a public charter free of unions.
And for the last 16 years, our school has been successful. Students have been going to college on full ride scholarships through UCSD, other colleges, and the school has taken off from there. And now, since 2018, the union came back, and the vibe of the school, I would say, has changed for the worse.
It's just horrible. Ever since the union was organized behind everybody's back.
I don't really understand the reason why they wanted to stop our community to be educated on the high level.
You're on a great pathway because you had this opportunity, but where do you think you would be if you were in the school when it was run by the union?
To be honest, I think I would be a statistic. I probably would, not have graduated. I would be in the streets. To be honest, that's a tough question. I don't know where I would be.
Parents tend to be pretty demanding customers of government when it comes to their own kids, and so the expectations for quality tend to be higher in a charter school. And in my experience, the people who work in them and teach in them rise to that occasion in a superior way over and above the role of the traditional neighborhood school, which, if you think about it, is a government-owned, unionized, bureaucratized monopoly.
And if parents are willing and able to oversee the education of their children, they shouldn't have to pay a huge amount of money to this system that has clearly failed. And I think my personal experience is really an excellent example of that. I have 5 children and I homeschool them, and they get a world-class education. It's infinitely superior to what passes for an education in the public school system, and yet I spend more money through my property taxes miseducating and indoctrinating other people's children in the public school system than I spend on my own children's education. There's something really wrong with that. There's something really unfair and really un-American about that. So I think we need to get back to the idea of parents should be in charge, and we should not be forced to fund a system, especially when we're not using it.
Some people also argue that school choice will destroy the public schools, but it doesn't do that. It actually does the opposite. Public schools up their game in response to competition. So school choice is a rising tide that lifts all boats, that benefits the students that have additional opportunities, but it obviously also benefits the students who remain in the public schools because of competitive pressures.
Everyone wants the very best education for their children so that they can have the brightest future possible. When you take school choice away and you force a family to put a child into a school system that fails them and doesn't achieve, you are forcing that child to grow up in a failed, rigged system.
The issues that I was having at that school was the school system itself was failing our kids. My kids.
Kelly Williams-Bollar's effort to try to give her daughters a better life has landed her behind bars. Bollar lives in a poor section of Akron, Ohio, and she sent her daughters to a highly ranked school in her father's neighboring district. She says she lived part-time with her father, and she did it to keep her daughters safe.
I received an indictment. My father received an indictment. It said, Kelly Williams-Bollar versus Ohio. So I'm like, what did I do?
This case shows how far a mother will go to give her children a better life.
They sentenced me to jail because I wanted a better education for my daughters.
I had a really poor experience at the elementary school in 4th and 5th grade with the IEP.
I was struggling in school. My parents had already known that I had been diagnosed with epilepsy by that point.
So because of my zip code, I was forced to go to the public school, and it was very challenging for me because I wanted to put her in a better school, and I knew there were better schools out there, but I had to go to the public school.
The lowest point was probably, I think, when my mom finally started catching on to what was happening with me in school. Not to mention, at the school I was at, I was getting really bullied. Like, I was getting shoved down in the hallways. Kids were not treating me well.
She needed help, and I didn't know how to do it. I was working 40 hours a week, and I had 4 children. I started to talk to the other mothers. What do you do? Where do you go? How can I get help? And someone mentioned to me there's a new charter school coming about 15 miles away.
And it changed everything. So I was really happy. I loved school. I was doing really well.
And all of a sudden her grades went from D's and F's to A's and B's. And she was happy and she was glowing. It was really exciting to see that.
It was the best decision they could have made for me. And then it got shut down.
So the public school gets paid per child sitting in the seat. And so the children were no longer sitting in their seats. They weren't getting paid because they were going to the local charter school.
And I was just like, well, there goes my favorite school.
I was really hurt and very upset that they, the public school, took away my child's best experience that she ever had. She grew. She learned at that school. That school made such a difference in my child's life, and they took it away on a technicality. And that's not fair.
Because of what happened to me, I want to become a teacher. I want to help these little kids and bring out the best in them. And I don't want to see what happened to me happen to them.
I was looking for my child to be educated. I looked at the product they were producing for individuals with special needs, and it was not a product that I wanted. This was my son. So I went to the superintendent of our district. My husband and I said, you know, your district has been labeled a failing school. Tell me why I should stay. And his comment, he looked me square in the eye and he said, you know, Mrs. Myers, I think you might want to take your children elsewhere. And I just felt numb. And I thought, they don't want to educate my child. They would have preferred for him to just become somebody that sits on the sofa and is not a productive member of society. And to me, I'm like, every child deserves the opportunity, whether it's my child, the neighbor's child. And if it's uncomfortable, then it's uncomfortable, because anything in life worth getting requires a little bit of effort. And my husband walked out and he wanted me to just throw in the towel at that point. He's like, we could do this on our own. I said, no, I think we need to push a little bit. Now, sometimes I look back and think, wow, I wish I'd have been a little more self-centered and just walked away. But as I look forward to what happened after that, the lives that were changed as a result of fighting those efforts, I realized that it was worthwhile.
The school choice about helped me my dreams come true, and I with my friends and my girlfriend for I was able to fit in for best I can be. Oh, great.
It's okay.
Sorry, I had my tears in my eyes. I am a part of a friends and family.
We need to get away from this idea that it's the government's responsibility to educate children. I do think massive tax cuts are a big part of the solution, putting power back in the hands of parents, but also a paradigm shift. We need to get away from this idea that it's the government's responsibility to educate children.
We see what's happening at school boards, school districts across the country. What we're finding is that we've got a tone-deaf set of so-called leaders across the country when it comes to education, who are not listening to parents, who are not listening to the cries of students, who clearly care more about political things and making statements and virtue signaling than in actually focusing on the quality of education for their students.
Transparency has become an issue with our school board.
They are assaulting parental rights. They are not respecting our cultures, our religious backgrounds, our values. They're not respecting our voice. And because of this, we have to get parents back in the driver's seat.
I think, mainly it's the approach and the methods that they use to intimidate and bully, and then to silence.
Hi, I'm a teacher from Fairfax County Public Schools. I'm going to give
a medical exemption.
I'm sorry?
Do you have a medical exemption for
I do.
mask? Okay. You've been cleared by staff. Can someone?
Yes, I have. Can I have my full minute, please?
You may.
Thank you.
I'm waiting for staff to give me a thumbs up that the medical exemption was granted.
It's actually embarrassing that you have to ask me that question in front of hundreds of people here. That's discrimination against HIPAA. It is. I can't ask you if you're gay. I can't ask you if you have herpes. You can't ask me about my medical exemption. I can't ask you if you're pregnant. You can't ask me that question.
Would you like your minute now?
I would love my minute, yes.
They shut down the last school board meeting because somebody got a rousing round of applause for their speech. Applause is expression.
The ongoing attempt to silence and control parents reached the point of absurdity as Douglas County once again made the national news as they attempted to outlaw clapping.
At the center of this is Douglas County, Colorado, where in an effort to make things safer, they're trying to ban clapping.
Audience, again, I'm sorry, McKinley.
That 5-year-old girl.
McKinley, if I could just have you stop again. Audience, this is the second time I've had to pause. I've clearly stated the expectations. We cannot comment. It makes it an unsafe environment for someone who has a different perspective.
And I know that they have all their rules, whatnot, but the rules don't override the First Amendment.
And I said, here's your assignment.
For the members of Chardonnay and Tifa, here is your assignment with a copy of the First Amendment attached. I'm going to lead this here, and I hope you learned something.
Felt good to be able to say that because they haven't honored it. They do need to do an assignment on the First Amendment.
We, the parents who make up the vast majority of this community, all we get to do is vote and then go to a school board meeting and speak for a minute if we're lucky before they shut us down.
The citizens of this county deserve better. And if you're not willing to do it,
Can you please cover your nose with your mask?
you're all vaccinated. What the freak?
I will tell you the way that I've been treated and the way that the school board members treat other parents is that we are these horrible people.
It's a really toxic environment right now.
We are vocal because we are our children's biggest advocates.
Your time's up.
So I learned from a teacher in the community who was brave enough to tell me that South Kingstown chapter of the NEA had a meeting to target me, a parent. And I'm a nobody in the community, I'm just a parent.
You told me to submit public record requests to answer my questions. I did what you told me. And now you're holding a public meeting to discuss suing me for doing what you told me to do.
After my school had this meeting to target me, the teacher union then ended up targeting me as well.
After the attempts to shut Nicole down, she did what many parents have realized they need to do, which is go to the media to get the message out.
They think that their teachers will be harassed, and of course no one wants anyone to be harassed, certainly not in the way the NEA has harassed me with frivolous litigation.
The attempt to bully parents into silence reached a fever pitch when Joe Biden weaponized the DOJ and the FBI to target parents, going as far as calling them domestic terrorists.
Well, you know what? The National School Boards Association should probably change their name. We should probably call them the Regional School Boards Association at this point, because 19 state-level school boards association have already decided to pull their membership or their funding from the National School Boards Association because of this ridiculous rhetoric, essentially implying that some parents should be labeled as domestic terrorists for simply voicing their opinions at school board meetings.
Every day, we just have to wonder how far will the government go to try to suppress the voices of parents at school board meetings who have legitimate concerns about their children's education.
This is about choice. It's about honoring parents.
It's not just critical race theory. It's not just our SROs and defunding the police, and it's not just students and lockdowns and masks. It all falls under one umbrella. It all is part of a tree. And we need to focus on the root of the problem.
The root of these problems is the unions, who collect billions of dollars from unsuspecting teachers to promote and fund policies that infect the branches of our educational tree. Our schools and our republic can be restored if we root out these corrupt unions. That's why it's so vital that we stand with teachers and give them the courage to break free from unions through a mass union exit.
In 2022, there's already 30 states now that have introduced legislation to fund students as opposed to systems.
People are nervous about going to school board meetings, calling for advice. What do I say? How do I do this? But they do it. And a lot of times they do a great job, and then they end up going viral and being national news.
It's very exciting to see thousands of parents now waking up and realizing that they have a right to be the ultimate authority in their children's life.
Parents can win this battle in the long run, but they have to keep up the energy, they have to keep up the fight. Parents are on the right side of history here.
What I see as the solution to having more choice in education is more parents becoming involved in their local school district races, in their local school board elections, in their local politics.
One way to do so is to show up at the school board meetings and make your voices heard in numbers. But at the same time, another solution is to fight for school choice policies, to have the right to take your child's education dollars to wherever you want them to get an education. Parents should fight to fund students, not systems.
Because parents in Douglas County stood together, we flipped our school board, and even the national media seemed to celebrate.
That was the scene after voters pushed back against the district's woke education policy. You won.
The parents won. Thank you.
Despite all of the terrible things that we have seen in education over the last couple of years, it is an exciting time to be alive because we're seeing a seismic shift in education in our country, and it will continue if we stand together in our day.
We need to free parents, students, and teachers from union power. Without union control in our schools, we see a restoration of parental authority and respect. We see honor and dignity returning to the teaching profession, and we know students have a safe and loving learning environment.
The government school monopoly has overplayed its hand, and at this point, the teachers' union monopoly is actively destroying its own empire, and it's absolutely glorious.
We're even seeing that in the rest of our national stage. Look at Virginia, where one of the politicians said that parents did not even have a right to know what their children were learning. And what did they do? They hired somebody else.
The great news is teachers' unions have finally overplayed their hand, showed their true colors, and awakened a sleeping giant. Parents who want more of a say in their kids' education. And look, the reality is parents care about their kids more than anybody else, and they're going to fight to make sure that they have the right to educate their kids as they see fit, harder than anyone will ever fight to take that right away from them. And so it would be wise of politicians from all parties to listen to this new special interest group, parents, going forward.
Let's never forget, from this moment on, we are the guardians of our children's education, their formation, and their future. And if we all stand together, good teachers, caring, brave parents, if we stand together now, we can look back at this day and say it is when we really achieved educational freedom and helped every student from every walk of life flourish. All we ask is that you join us.
As for the question as whose kids are they, they're my kids. They're your kids.
They are not property of the government
of the school district, of teachers' unions, of any kind of agenda out there. These are my children.
They are my children.
These are my children.
They're my children.
They're our children.
They're our children.
They're our children.
They're our children.
They're the future of the nation.
Cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that